For our episode on religion and politics, we talked to Jail Cornelio, Associate Professor and the Director of the Development Studies Program at the Ateneo Manila University. He was also recently awarded as one of the 10 outstanding young men for 2021 for his contributions to education and sociology. Here is our full interview.
Welcome to this special episode of Hindi na Bago Yan, the fourth season of podcast. Today we have Dr. Jail Cornelio of the Ateneo de Manila University's Development Studies Program. And we have a very important topic to be discussed today. We will be talking about the relationship between religion and politics, especially in light of the coming elections. So, hi Jail, thank you for agreeing to be with us in this episode.
Hi, Aaron, and hi to everyone who is tuned in right now to podcast. What a privilege to be here. Finally, sa inyo. Salamat.
All right, so let's hit the ground running, no? So, as we all know, syempre, in the context of the Philippines, we are a predominantly Christian country with over half of the population subscribing to the Roman Catholic faith, with several Christian denominations and many faith-based groups. So we often hear this statement that we need to separate the church and state, this constitutional provision of separating church and state. But of course, it's not black and white. We often live in the gray zones, and it is never that easy. So I'd like to start our conversation with that question to ask you, broadly speaking, how does religion play a part in the lives of Filipinos, especially the political lives of Filipinos?
Brilliant. The Philippines is one of the most religious societies in the world, Aaron. Surveys show that napakababa ng mga atheists sa Pilipinas or ng mga non-affiliated. 90% of Filipinos belong to a Christian group. 80% are Catholic. The others are evangelicals, and the others are from the indigenous or independent churches, like Iglesia ni Cristo or the Kingdom of Jesus Christ, ni Pastor Apollo Kibolole, and then the rest are Muslims and people of other faiths. Okay. In other words, given our religious diversity and given the high religiosity of Filipinos, it's impossible to separate religion, religious worldviews, theological viewpoints from people's political choices. Now, is that good or bad? It's a double-edged sword. I think yun yung dapat natin pag-usapan. Hindi siya pwedeng evil lang parating or hindi siya pwedeng parating good lang. It's a double-edged sword. What do I mean by that? From a sociological perspective, pwedeng makatulong ang relihiyon or pananampalataya, pwedeng the religious institution, pwedeng private personal beliefs, pwedeng moral worldviews. Those are all different aspects of religion, ano? Lahat ng yun pwedeng makatulong sa pagpapalalim ng ating democratic culture or cultures, democratic conversations. Pwedeng makatulong yan. Halimbawa, the role of values in challenging us to make informed decisions about what policies to support or which candidates to endorse and so forth. The good side, democratic conversations. Pero double-edged sword siya. So pwede rin siyang maging inimical to democratic cultures. Halimbawa, we have religious cultures that exalt authoritarianism. Tahimik ka na lang. Huwag ka nang magtanong. Sumunod ka na lang para sa ikatataguyod at sa pagkakaisa, no? Uso-uso yung salitang yan ngayon, no? Pagkakaisa ng ating simbahan, sumunod ka na lang. Total, nasa Biblia naman yan. So may mga ganyan, no? May theological justifications for being silent, for authoritarian preferences. Ang haba na sagot ko, no? Pero I think you get the point, no, Aaron. So on the one hand, may ganun, no? May ganun parang religious cultures that are really inimical or religious practices that are inimical to democratic conversations. Pero pangalawa, alam din naman natin that religious institutions, this time, no, let's talk about organizations, are not always on the good side of history. They love being with the powerful, praying over questionable politicians. Siyempre, ang theological justification, kung yun naman ang makakapag-convert sa kanila at makakapagbabago sa kanila, bakit hindi? Ang hindi lang nila naiisip is that, well, what are you really endorsing in the end, di ba? And many churches, religious groups are committing that grave sin, if I can call it that. No? Kasi by siding with the powerful, they lose their ability to question them when these politicians commit serious and really questionable decisions as leaders. Hindi mo na magagawa yun. In theological speak, you fail to fulfill your prophetic calling as a church kasi you are already one with the powerful, inimical to democracy.
All right. No, so I'd like to pick your brain a little bit on that. Kasi you talked medyo macro, 'di ba, na institutions pero can we try to zoom in medyo yung micro level? Maybe even to the individual level if you may. Kasi we often see this in conversations offline and online, 'di ba? Na parang we see people, for example, fronting that they are subscribing to a particular religious belief. But then again, they openly support a particular candidate of questionable moral character. How does that play out, at least in an individual person's mind, for example? How do you navigate that na the Bible is clear, for example, in stating that you should not kill and you should not, steal, and then you have certain characters in the political sphere having this record of doing such, and then you openly support them. So, paano yun nagpe-play out sa religiosity ng mga tao?
Galing dun sa kanyang theological or moral worldview bilang isang tao. Posible na, okay, when we talk about morality and religion, and the life of a person, hindi natin pwedeng i-assume that it is always consistent. That's the very first premise that we have in the sociology of religion. To put it provocatively, laging split level ang isang tao. There are always two levels. No? Parang the religious worldview, if you will, or the moral framework na parang dapat ito, dapat hindi ganyan. Pero meron ding another level na parang it really depends on what happens on the ground. Let me negotiate my morality when I get to that point. No? So doon pala makikita na natin na pagdating sa politics, hindi readily na-apply ang the Ten Commandments. Pero it's also possible, and this is where being familiar and being aware of the moral justifications ng other camp really matters. Posible kasi na they don't necessarily see stealing or lying as the fundamental issue in politics. Posible kasi ang fundamental issue sa kanila ay halimbawa abortion, divorce. Nakita ko na yan. Merong candidates kasi sa presidential elections na ngayon, di ba? May mga candidates, without naming names, no? May mga candidates who are really very much open to. Tell me if I can name names, pero if I can?
Sige, you can name names and then we can just edit it out later if you want to censor it.
Oh, well, no need to censor really. It's your call. So halimbawa, may mga candidates who are, na-realize ko, so Leni Robredo, for example, is very much open to, she hasn't really made a stand concerning, halimbawa, abortion, right? So very, pero sinabi niya, at one point, sinabi niya that she is open to having conversations, with women who experience rape and so forth. Big no yan. If you come from a conservative religious group, whether Catholic or evangelical or any Protestant denomination, or one of those religious groups, na ultra-conservative, na talagang no. Kasi life begins at conception, etc. So pag ganun, automatic single issue ka lang na ang political preference mo. Then you turn to you turn to other candidates who will be categorical on this matter. So they turn to Bongbong Marcos, or they turn to Manny Pacquiao. We can go on and on with all these hot button issues, Aaron. Gender equality, Manny Pacquiao. Same-sex marriage, Manny Pacquiao. Di ba? War on drugs is a moral issue. Sa pananaw ng nating mga progressives at mga human rights advocates and faith-based activists, maling-mali ang war on drugs. Pero sa pananaw nung isang, and this is based on my research with Aaron Medina and Iya Maranyon, sa pananaw ng maraming mga religious leaders that we talk to, some of them are mega church pastors, some of them are pastors of small churches, certain lives are far more valuable. Kita mo, may hierarchies. May hierarchies of acceptable lives and unacceptable lives. Kasi nga, ang logic naman nila is that, bakit ko paproteksyonan yung isang pumili ng buhay na ganyan? Kesa dun sa anak ko na hindi naman siya drug addict, o proteksyonin ko yung anak ko bago siya ma-implementyahan nito. Paano po kung pinatay siya, yung drug addict? Well, sabi ng Bible, for the wages of sin is death. Daling gumamit ng verses na ganun. Dali nun. See? Single issue. Single issue. That's why many evangelicals and conservative Christians rallied behind Duterte's war on drugs. They continue to do so to this day. Lungkot, no? Pero that's the state of our religious landscape today. It's conservative, hindi nga lang conservative, fundamentalist even. Without proper regard, di ba, Aaron? Without proper regard for the common good.
Yeah, and it's quite in several ways ironic kasi diba, we're trying to preach the idea that salvation is for everyone, and then you hierarchize lives, no? So so maybe I'll just to go back to your point a while ago na nakita na natin how these religious groups and religious institutions have played a part in politics. Of course, it's not just in the war on drugs that we've seen this. We've seen this, for example, in the strong lobby against the RH bill, diba? No? So within this context, can we say that these religious groups are politicized? Can we use that term?
Yes. Yes, we can use that word, politicized. But I'm approaching it differently sa scholarship ko, Aaron. Sa literature ngayon, sa mga sociologists of religion, many of us are becoming interested dun sa konsepto ng religious nationalism. Yan. Ano yung religious nationalism? Jargon po yun, ano, mga kapatid. Pero allow me just to explain it. Yung idea that the nation has a specific religious identity. So the Philippines is a Christian nation. Paulit-ulit nating naririnig yan. It's almost always unproblematized. No? Parang journalists say that, commentators use that, pastors and priests use that. The Philippines is the only Christian nation in Asia, mga ganyang mga statements. What they don't realize is that it's also a politically loaded, politically charged statement. What kind of Christianity are we talking about? Yung progressive ba o yung conservative? O yung ultra-right wing? Yun ba ang tinutukoy natin? Kasi kapag may Christians naman na pro-divorce, pero hindi sila kasama doon. Why? Because the assumption of this kind of Christian nationalism, or what I call theological nationalism in my own writings, is that the Philippines is Christian and its holiness needs to be upheld. And yung holiness na yan is defined according to certain certain values. Heteronormative, patriarchal, even violent, taken to a certain extreme. So that's why yung RH bill nahirapan. More than a decade bago siya nakalusot. Bakit? Kasi, well, the argument is that sex has to be for procreative purposes. Pero what it really does is it really disciplines the woman, right? The woman has no other role in life but to become a mother. Yan, may ganyan yan eh. Walang responsibility tuloy dun sa uh, you know, the wider population and so forth. Ganun din ang makikita natin sa resistance to divorce. Bakit? Kasi marriage is supposed to be a holy institution, sacred, you know, and what God has put together, let no man put asunder, may mga ganyang statements. And again, I understand. Pero ang hindi nare-recognize is domestic violence. Paano yun? Right? Ano pang example? Same-sex marriage, right? Lalo na same-sex marriage kasi the idea is that homosexuality and they have terms for this, not these conservatives. The homosexual agenda, right, is going to destroy the moral fabric of the nation. No? Same-sex marriage, parents, same-sex parenting, and so forth. At ang laging imagery na narinig ng mga tao sa ganyan ay Sodom and Gomorrah, God is gonna punish the Philippines. Mga ganun. Forget the fact na actually, pinaparusahan na po ang Pilipinas kahit wala pa po tayong same-sex marriage. Because for many other reasons. No? So yun. Bakit? Bakit kailangan i-defend the Philippines? Because it is a Christian nation of a particular color. See? It's politically charged against people who don't subscribe to that kind of Christianity. But nasa na yung religious freedom doon? The freedom to choose my own beliefs or not believe at all. Kasama yun sa religious freedom. Hindi sila, apektado sila yung mga ganyan fundamentalist policies.
Yeah, pero allow me to digress a bit, no? So kasi you mentioned this that it has a very nationalistic character, 'di ba? Yung ganitong lines of thinking. Pero in your work, you also look into this idea, you term it religious worlding, 'di ba? No, so how do we square that with the idea that it has a very particular nationalistic character, but these evangelical groups also try to project that they can accommodate other nationalities?
Galing. Thanks for bringing that up. Yung konsepto ng religious worlding po, na hindi worlding sa mga kapatid, no? Mga nakikinig sa atin ngayon. It's an orientation, it's both psychological but also material projection of in my work of a religious group towards the world. Kaya siya worlding. So halimbawa, yung pagpapatayo ng Philippine Arena, ng Iglesia ni Cristo, it's an example of religious worlding in the sense na they're using all their financial resources to build a triumphalist architecture or triumphalist space. Diba? Philippine Arena ay nasa Ciudad de Victoria, the City of Victory. You can do a discourse analysis of all these names. Na makikita mo na parang, yeah, it's really a triumphalist religion. Pero the City of Victory and Philippine Arena is not projected to us Filipinos. Hindi siya yung katulad ng kanilang central, yung Templo Central, no? Dito sa Commonwealth na when it was built in the 1980s, it was built really in at the time when Iglesia ni Cristo became a national religion, in the sense na everywhere you go, may makikita kang mga lokal na kapilya. When in 2014, when Iglesia ni Cristo became their 100th anniversary in 2014, they built Ciudad de Victoria, but this time projecting their global presence. No? And that's true. No? Wherever you go, there are Iglesia ni Cristo members, not just among Filipinos, but really among other nationalities. How do you square that with religious nationalism, with Christian nationalism? Very simple. That's a great question, by the way, Aaron. And the answer is pretty simple. Because the idea is that the Philippines is now the center of Christianity. Yun ang konsepto ng worlding. You project to the world, pero you're actually inviting the world to see you. At maririnig natin yan in so many ways, no? Kay Pastor Apollo Kibuloy, meron siyang prayer garden, the prayer mountain, the New Jerusalem, ang Davao. Diba? Wala sa Israel ang New Jerusalem, nasa Davao. Alright? Yung Ciudad de Victoria, ano bang claim ng Iglesia ni Cristo? It's the one true church to emerge in the last days At ang prophecy is Far East, correct?
Mhm.
Far East. Asan yung Far East? Pilipinas, right? Evangelicals, look at churches, born-again Christian churches like Every Nation, Victory, nasa na headquarters nila? Pilipinas. Ano ang kanilang orientation? Asia. So, gano'n, di ba? Parang very, and the Philippines, these churches can make that claim about the Philippines because they have already amassed all the resources, financial, material, and even membership to make this worlding happen. And the center of it all is the Philippines. So it's still nationalistic.
All right. No, so di ba, you mentioned that, di ba, that they've built this infrastructure, to put it simply, di ba, to allow them to project this particular religious worlding, and uh they've accumulated several people and millions of people, no? So di ba nga, I remember when the Iglesia ni Cristo had the centennial, and they had this, I believe, this idea that each member to recruit one member the idea to double the number, diba? No? So, and I would like to relate this to, again, to relate it back to the political life in the Philippines. We often, of course, hear this evangelical denominations na they try to present the idea that they are united through the block voting, diba? Now, although of course it doesn't happen on the ground, we know that, but I just would like to ask you, uh, ano ba yung justification, if you can call it that, theologically, to have the members of the church vote as one, you know? How do they present this idea to the members? Kasi ito yung isang very contentious issues din within the conversations in the Philippines.
Oh, totoo, totoo. The theological basis is unity, no? Pagkakaisa ng iglesia, pagkakaisa ng simbahan. Obviously, this is really quite prominent in Iglesia ni Cristo, but you can see traces of this discourse sa ibang mga religious groups din, no? Ngayon, ang unity sa theology, it's really mystical, di ba? What does it mean? Di ba? Nagkakaisa ang body of Christ. But where is the body of Christ? It's a mystical entity. Wherever people of faith are, there's the body of Christ. No? Pero sa Iglesia ni Cristo, it's very organizational. It's reflected in the organization. So makikita mo yan, halimbawa, doon sa architecture. Wherever you go, it's neo-Gothic. Doon pala, makikita mo yan. For other religious groups, no, it's really the fashion. Bawal magpagupit, bawal ito, yung mga damit dapat hindi mas mataas sa tuhod, mga ganyan, no? Doon na-express yun. But for Iglesia ni Cristo, it's expressed in a far more politically charged manner, no? Elections. The reality is that at least 70% ang adherence rate, Aaron, according to exit polls, no? 70%. So if we're talking about, let's just assume that there are 2 million Iglesia members, no? Or so, no? Let's just assume na ilan sa kanila doon, at least 1 million ang boboto. 70% agad doon will follow, no, the endorsements of the religious leader. So there's the theology of unity and so forth. And unity as uniformity, you give up your freedom, your free will, for the sake of unity. Strict church, that's really the power of a strict church, which leads me to the other point. Na these churches, the theology of unity, or unity, is not only a theological matter. It is also very sociological. Bakit? Kasi makikita mo how socially controlled people are. Diba? Pag-uusapan nyo sa isa't isa, kung sinunod mo ba yun. It's also sociological in the sense na the doctrine affects your own psychological disposition. Marami akong nakausap ng mga tao na feeling nila, kahit gusto nilang iboto yung isang kandidato, pero pag hindi nila ginawa yun, ay nagkakasala sila. Hindi na yung theological, di ba? It's really the power of the social fact nasa sociology. The external force becoming internalized. Internalization ang tawag natin doon. And meron ka ng self-restraint, or restraint or disciplining of your body and of your choices. So nakikita natin doon na hindi lang siya theological but is clearly structural, clearly internal. No? Nagiging internal yung structure. So marami akong nakausap din na mga kilala na dahil ayaw nilang iboto yung in-endorse ng administration, ng, ng pamumuno, no? Ng pamunuan, hindi na lang to sila boboto. Para at least hindi sila magkasala. See? That's what I was saying kanina, di ba? Na how religious worldviews can also be inimical to democracy, to democratic practice.
Wow, that's an important point, I think, na i-highlight natin. So pero now I'd like to bring into the conversation, of course, the reality that even though we are predominantly a Christian country, may mga Muslims sa Philippines, 'di ba? And also we have a very significant population, especially in the southern Philippines, that are Muslims. And of course, there are several groups in the Philippines that are indigenous, indigenous faith yung kanilang paniniwala. No? So, how do we bring this context into the conversation of religion and politics in the Philippines?
Nako, wala. 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 The Philippines is a Christian nation eh. Di asan yung mga lumad? Right? Asan yung mga Muslim? Nasaan ang mga Moro? Andun nagbebenta sa Divisoria. Hanggang doon lang yan eh. Without us realizing it, actually, it engenders Islamophobia. It engenders the fear of the unknown, the fear of the other. Eh, akala ko ba isang bansa tayo? That's exactly what we're talking about now, the dangers of the material consequences, no, of claiming the Philippines to be just a Christian nation. May challenge sa atin dito eh. Mababa kasi yung what Manuel Sapitola refers to as the religious literacy of the Filipino. Yung mababa yung pagkakaunawa niya sa hindi niya kapaniniwala. Mababa eh. When the Marawi siege took place in 2017, anong sabi ng mga tao dito sa Maynila? Eh kasi yung mga Muslim, violente. O di doon pa lang, parang you're essentially saying, ay talaga, dapat bombahin yan. Doon pa lang makikita na natin na wala siya sa political consciousness natin. Bunga rin yan, syempre, mula nung discourse that the Spaniards, of course, as you know, Aaron, created. No? Yung mga Moro bilang juramentado. No? Bilang mga, hindi nila mapasok yung Mindanao kasi maraming nagkukuramentado doon. So tuloy, yung stereotype na violent sila, dalan-dalan natin hanggang hundreds of years later, dalan-dala pa rin natin yung Islamophobia na yan. We don't, in other words, have that sense of a consciousness that the Philippines is in fact not a Christian country, but a religiously diverse society. That is the challenge. That is the challenge. It takes the transformation of our educational system. It takes the transformation of our political system even. Wouldn't it be nice kung magmamandate ka na you have a national senator who would always come from the Bangsamoro? That would change the color of our politics.
I love that. Yeah, I love that point. I've always thought of it that way as well. Na we need to institutionalize representation.
Yes.
Kasi it's one way to really bring it out there. If it's not being talked about, then let's have instances where it will be talked about. Na parang institutionalize it. No, so. And you've mentioned then na it's a challenge. It's a very big challenge that we need to tackle. And maybe with this I can ask you for your concluding thoughts for this interview as well. As a sociologist of religion immersed in this particular field, what can you share to a Filipino voter? For example, myself, I'm a Filipino voter, and I'm trying to think about my choices in the coming elections. Why is it important for me to think about religion and politics in the coming elections?
Wow, that's a challenging question. It's important for every Filipino voter to be cognizant of religion and politics because religion is a consequential institution. But it's also consequential as a belief, as a worldview. Diba? Religion as institution, correct. Endorsements, alam natin yan. Religion as a belief, correct. Alam natin yan. Napag-usapan natin kanina yan. Worldviews, diba? That affect, that create all these hierarchies of acceptable lives and unacceptable lives. Napag-usapan natin yan. I don't think many Filipinos are really aware of this, of the interplay between religion and politics. Kaya tuloy, ang babaw lagi ng reaction. Church-state separation. Church-state separation, mababaw yun, mga kapatid. No? Mababaw yun. Kasi, yes, constitutionally, the church has to be separated from the state. The state has to be separated from the church. And there are really protocols for that. Pero paano mo naman isa-separate yun kung cultural ang religion? Paano mo naman isa-separate yun? Hindi naman pwede mo boto yung tao na, yung religion mo, hawag mo na isasama pagpasok mo dun sa botohan. I therefore encourage all of us, especially our students, think of this question as a takeaway from this podcast. What does it mean to be Filipino? What does it mean to be a Filipino voter in a religiously diverse society? Not in a Christian society, but in a religiously diverse society. One in which you expect disagreements. One in which you expect different worldviews affecting all of us. And there are only two ways to answer that. One is ipaglalaban mo ang tama at ikaw lang ang tama and therefore everybody else is wrong. Or ipaglalaban mo yung idea na meron tayong pwedeng pag-agrihan. The common good. Karapatang pantao, dignidad ng tao, kapakanan ng mga mahihirap, kapakanan ng mga pinabayaan at napapabayaan. Kapakanan ng mga taong hindi natin kilala, pero mahalaga rin ang buhay nila. After all, that's what our faiths teach us anyway. Our faith is useless if ultimately you're only thinking of yourself. Our faith can only make sense in relation to other people. To love God, to love the transcendent, to love the divine can only make sense if you're able to express that love, not just to yourself, but to other people. And
Right.
Politics.
Thank you so much. I think that's a wonderful closing statement. Thank you so much, Jail. Would you like to share or invite people about your recent activities or where they can follow you in social media before we close? Yeah.
I want to invite you. Let me know your thoughts. No, let me know your thoughts dun sa mga pinag-usapan natin namin ni Aaron ngayon. Share with me sa Twitter. I'm active on Facebook, but I'm more active on Twitter. Ang handle ko ay @jail_Cornelio. I'm sure, and shoot me a message. Some people who have encountered my writings and my work have already messaged me, and I get a lot of really wonderful feedback. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know. Pag-usapan natin. At hopefully mas makatulong yung ganung conversation at a more personal level.
We would like to thank Jail for generously lending us his expertise and guesting in this episode of Hindi na Bago Yan. Watch out for a new episode every Saturday. For updates on the show, like, subscribe, or follow our social media pages. That's it for now. Have a good day.